What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. We're going to finish up Blackshirts and Reds, Chapter 9, Part 2. This is probably the most important segment of the entire book. Parenti saves the best for last. So if you're going to listen to or re-listen to any part of this book, I think this is the most important part. It's just the last 10 pages or so. It is integral and very well written. Again, I gave this book 5 stars. I finished it a couple of days ago. But listen up, guys. This is page 149, chapter 9, Anything But Class, Avoiding the C Word. Everyday class struggle. To support their view that class, in the Marxist sense, is passé, the ABC theorists repeatedly assert that there is not going to be a workers' revolution in the United States in the foreseeable future. Now, ABC theorists are anything but class theorists, so fake lefties. Boutique lefties is what I call them. I heard this sentiment expressed at 3 different panels during a Gramsci conference at Amherst, Massachusetts in April 1987. Even if we agree with this prophecy, we might still wonder how it becomes grounds for rejecting class analysis and for concluding that there is no such thing as exploitation of labor by capital and no opposition from people who work for a living. The feminist revolution that was going to transform our entire patriarchal society has thus far not materialized, yet no progressive person takes this to mean that sexism is a chimera or that gender-related struggles are of no great moment. That workers in the United States are not throwing up barricades does not mean class struggle is a myth. In present-day society, such struggle permeates almost all workplace activities. Employers are relentlessly grinding away at workers, and workers are constantly fighting back against employers. Capital's class war is waged with court injunctions, anti-labor laws, police repression, union busting, contract violations, sweatshops, dishonest clocking of time, safety violations, harassment and firing of resistant workers, cutbacks in wages and benefits, raids of pension programs, layoffs, and plant closings. Labor fights back with union organizing, strikes, slowdowns, boycotts, public demonstrations, job actions, coordinated absenteeism, and workplace sabotage, which I quite like that last one, workplace sabotage. Class has a dynamic that goes beyond its immediate visibility. Whether we are aware of it or not, class realities permeate our society, determining much about our capacity to pursue our own interests. Class power is a factor in setting the political agenda, selecting leaders, reporting the news, funding science and education, distributing health care, mistreating the environment, depressing wages, resisting racial and gender equality, marketing entertainment and the arts, propagating religious messages, suppressing dissidents, and defining social reality itself. ABC theorists see the working class as not only incapable of revolution, but as on the way out, declining in significance as a social formation. Anyone who still thinks that class is of primary importance is labeled a die-hard Marxist, guilty of economism and reductionism, and unable to keep up with post-Marxist, post-structuralist, post-industrialist, post-capitalist, post-modernist, and post-deconstructionist times. It is ironic that some left intellectuals should deem class struggle to be largely irrelevant at the very time class power is becoming increasingly transparent. At the very time, corporate concentration and profit accumulation is more rapacious than ever, and the tax system has become more regressive and oppressive, the upward transfer of income and wealth is accelerated, public sector assets are being privatized, corporate money exercises an increasing control over the political process, people at home and abroad are working harder for less, and throughout the world, poverty is growing at a faster rate than overall population. There are neoconservatives and mainstream centrists who manifest a better awareness of class struggle than the left, quote-unquote, ABC theorists. Thus, former managing editor of the New York Times, A.M. Rosenthal, sees the Republican Party's slash and burn offensive against social programs as, quote, not only a prescription for class struggle, but the beginning of its reality. Rosenthal goes on to quote Wall Street financier Felix Rohatyn, who notes that the big beneficiaries of our economic expansion have been the owners of financial assets, in what amounts to a, quote, huge transfer of wealth from lower-skilled middle-class American workers to the owners of capital assets and to the new technological aristocracy. Increasingly, working people see themselves as simply temporary assets to be hired or fired to protect the bottom line and create quote-unquote shareholder value. It says a little for the quote-unquote left ABC intellectuals when they can be outclassed by establishment people like Rosenthal and Rohatyn. Seizing upon anything but class, U.S. leftists today have developed an array of identity groups centering around ethnic, gender, and cultural and lifestyle issues. These groups treat their respective grievances as something apart from class struggle, and have almost nothing to say about the increasingly harsh politico-economic class injustices perpetuated against us all. This is talking about how identity politics is used to defeat class war, and class war is the way that we're going to get revolution. And that's why a lot of these boutique lefties only focus on culture war issues, because they know that it nerfs a potential lefty revolution that gets everybody what they need. Identity groups tend to emphasize their distinctiveness and their separateness from each other, thus fractionalizing the protest movement. I'm going to read that again. Identity groups tend to emphasize their distinctiveness, their separateness from each other, thus fractionalizing the protest movement. To be sure, they have important contributions to make around issues that are particularly salient to them, issues often overlooked by others, but they also should not downplay their common interests, nor overlook the common class enemy that they face. The forces that impose class injustice and economic exploitation are the same ones that propagate racism, sexism, militarism, ecological devastation, homophobia, xenophobia, and the like. One more time for the people in the back. But they also should not downplay their common interest, nor overlook the common class enemy they face. The forces that impose class injustice and economic exploitation are the same ones that propagate racism, sexism, militarism, ecological devastation, homophobia, xenophobia, and the like. People may not develop a class consciousness, but they still are affected by the power, privileges, and handicaps related to the distribution of wealth and want. These realities are not canceled out by race, gender, or culture. The latter factors operate within an overall class society. The exigencies of class power and exploitation shape the social reality we all live in. Racism and sexism help to create super-exploited categories of workers, minorities, and women, and reinforce the notions of inequality that are so functional for capitalist systems. To embrace a class analysis is not to deny the significance of identity issues, but to see how these are linked both to each other and to the overall structure of politico-economic power. An awareness of class relations deepens our understanding of culture, race, gender, and other such things. You see why this is the most important part of the whole book? Wealth and power. In order that a select few might live in opulence, millions of people work hard for an entire lifetime, never free from financial insecurity, and at great cost to the quality of their lives. The complaint is not that the very rich have so much more than everyone else, but that their superabundance and endless accumulation comes at the expense of everyone and everything else, including our communities and our environment. Great concentrations of wealth give the owner class control not over just the livelihoods of millions, but over civic life itself. Money is the necessary ingredient that gives the rich their immense political influence, their monopoly of ownership of mass media, their access to skilled lobbyists and high public offices. To those who possess it, great wealth also brings social prestige and cultural dominance, including membership on governing boards of foundations, universities, museums, research institutions, and professional schools. Likewise, the absence of money is what makes the have-nots and the have-littles relatively powerless, depriving them of access to national media and severely limiting their influence over political decision-makers. As the gap between the corporate rich and the rest of us grows, the opportunities for popular rule diminish. There is much discourse on, quote, how to balance freedom with security. History offers numerous examples of leaders who, in the name of national security, have been ready to extinguish what precious few liberties people might have after generations of struggle. Challenges to the privileged social order are treated as attacks upon all social order, a plunge into chaos and anarchy. Repressive measures are declared necessary to safeguard people from the dangers of terrorism, subversives, Reds, and other supposed enemies, both foreign and domestic. Again and again, we are asked to choose between freedom and security, when in truth, there is no security without freedom. In both dictatorships and democracies, the agencies of national security, acting secretively and unaccountably, have regularly violated both our freedom and our security, practicing every known form of repression, corruption, and deceit. Once in control of the state, plutocratic interests can use a regressive tax system to make the public pay for the agencies of repression that are essential to elite domination. Still, democratic governance can prove troublesome, inciting all sorts of popular demands and imposing restraints on big businesses' enjoyment of a freewheeling market. For this reason, the captains of capitalism and their conservative publicists support both a strong state armed with every intrusive power and a weak government unable to stop corporate abuse or serve the needs of the ordinary populace. Aside from the systemic imperatives that cause capitalism to accumulate without end, we must also reckon with the driving force of class greed. Wealth is an addiction. There is no end to the amount of money one might desire to accumulate. The best security to being rich is to still get richer, piling possession upon possession, giving oneself over to the auri sacra fames, the cursed greed for gold, the desire for more money that can be consumed in 1,000 lifetimes of limitless indulgence, wanting in nothing but still more and more and more money. Wealth buys every comfort and privilege in life, the fame of fortune, elevating the possessor to the highest social stratosphere, an expression of the aggrandizing self, an expansion of the ego's boundary, an extension of one's existence beyond the grave, leaving one feeling almost invulnerable to time and morality. Wealth is pursued without moral restraint. The very rich try to crush anyone who resists their endless, heartless, unprincipled accumulation. Like any addiction, money is pursued in that obsessive, amoral, single-minded way, revealing a total disregard for what is right or wrong, just or unjust, an indifference to other considerations and other people's interests, and even one's own interests should they go beyond feeding that addiction. Capitalism is a rational system, the well-calculated systematic maximization of power and profits, a process of accumulation anchored in material obsession that has the ultimately irrational consequence of devouring the system itself, and everything else with it. Eco-apocalypse, a class act. In 1876, Marx's collaborator Friedrich Engels offered a prophetic caveat, quote, "Let us not flatter ourselves overmuch on account of our human conquest over nature, for each such conquest takes its revenge on us. At every step we are reminded that we by no means rule over nature like a conqueror over a foreign people, like someone standing outside of nature, but that we, with flesh, blood, and brain, belong to nature and exist in its midst." With its never-ending emphasis on exploitation and expansion, and its indifference to environmental costs, capitalism appears determined to stand outside of nature. The essence of capitalism, its raison d'etre, is to convert nature into commodities and then commodities into capital, transforming the living earth into inanimate wealth. This capital accumulation process wreaks havoc upon the global ecological system. It treats the planet's life-sustaining resources like arable land, groundwater, wetlands, forests, fisheries, ocean beds, rivers, air quality, as dispensable ingredients of limitless supply, to be consumed or toxified at will. Consequently, the support systems of the entire ecosphere, the planet's thin skin of fresh air, water, and topsoil, are at risk, threatened by such things as global warming, massive erosion, and ozone depletion. Global warming is caused by tropical deforestation, motor vehicle exhaust, and other fossil fuel emissions that create, quote, greenhouse gas, trapping heat close to the Earth's surface. This massed heat is altering the atmospheric chemistry and climate patterns across the planet, causing record droughts, floods, tidal waves, snowstorms, hurricanes, heat waves, and great losses in soil moisture. We now know that the planet does not have a limitless ability to absorb heat caused by energy consumption. Another potential catastrophe is the shrinkage of the ozone layer that shields us from the sun's deadliest rays. Over 2.5 billion pounds of ozone-depleting chemicals are emitted into the Earth's atmosphere every year, resulting in excessive ultraviolet radiation that is causing an alarming rise in skin cancer and other diseases. Increased radiation is damaging trees, crops, coral reefs, and destroying the ocean's phytoplankton, a source of about half the planet's oxygen. If the oceans die, so do we. At the same time, the rise in pollution and population has given us acid rain, soil erosion, silting of waterways, shrinking grasslands, disappearing water supplies and wetlands, and the obliteration of thousands of species, with hundreds more on the endangered list. In 1970, on what was called Environment Day, President Nixon intoned, quote, "What a strange creature is man that he fouls his own nest." With that utterance, Nixon was helping to propagate the myth that the ecological crisis we face is a matter of irrational individual behavior rather than being of a social magnitude. In truth, the problem is not individual choice, but the system that imposes itself on individuals and prefigures their choice. Behind the ecological crisis is the reality of class interest and power. An ever-expanding capitalism and a fragile finite ecology are on the calamitous collision course. It is not true that the ruling political economic interests are in a state of denial about all this. Far worse than denial. They're in a state of utter antagonism toward those they think the planet is more important than corporate profits. So they defame environmentalists as eco-terrorists, the EPA Gestapo, Earth Day alarmists, tree huggers, and purveyors of green hysteria, and liberal claptrap. Some environmental activists in this country have been the object of terrorist assault conducted by unknown assailants, with the implicit tolerance of law enforcement authorities. Autocrats in countries like Nigeria, in bed with the polluting oil companies, have waged brutal war upon environmentalists, going so far as to hang popular leader Ken Saro-Wiwa. And if you know anything about, like, Steve Donziger, for instance, who sued Chevron and won for $9.5 billion for them doing all that shenanigans down in Ecuador. They ruined his life. He had to spend like over 2 years on house arrest, even though he did nothing more than win a giant lawsuit against a massive oil company that was polluting the shit out of, the global south and causing cancer in babies. So we do this too. Nowadays, they'll ruin your life if you're a good environmentalist that actually makes a difference. In recent years, conservatives within and without Congress, fueled by corporate lobbyists, have supported measures that would, 1, prevent the Environmental Protection Agency from keeping toxic fill out of lakes and harbors, 2, eliminate most of the wetland acreage that was set aside for reserves, 3, completely deregulate the production of chlorofluorocarbons that deplete the ozone layer, 4, virtually eliminate clean water and clean air standards, 5, open the unspoiled Arctic Wildlife Refuge in Alaska to oil and gas drilling, 6, defund efforts to keep raw sewage out of rivers and away from beaches, 7, privatize and open national parks to commercial development, 8, give the few remaining ancient forests over to unrestrained logging, and 9, repeal the Endangered Species Act. In sum, their openly professed intent has been to eviscerate all of our environmental protections, however inadequate these are. And by the way, he says conservatives. That includes Democrats like Joe Biden, who is, a lefty in label only. They all do this same thing. There's been more drilling done under Joe Biden than there was even under Trump. So, and they're both bad, but acting like it's just conservatives or just righties, yeah, that includes the Democrats who are also in power. So, conservatives maintain that there is no environmental crisis. Technological advances will continue to make life better for more and more people. One might wonder why rich and powerful interests take this seemingly suicidal anti-environmental route. They can destroy welfare, public housing, public education, public transportation, Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid with impunity, for they and their children will not thereby be deprived, having more than sufficient means to procure private services for themselves. But the environment is a different story. Wealthy conservatives and their corporate lobbyists inhabit the same polluted planet as everyone else, eat the same chemicalized food, and breathe the same toxified air. In fact, they do not live exactly as everyone else. They experience a different class reality, residing in places where the air is somewhat better than in low and middle income areas. They have access to food that is organically raised and specifically prepared. The nation's toxic dumps and freeways usually are not situated in or near their swanky neighborhoods. The pesticide sprays are not poured over their trees and gardens. Clear cutting does not desolate their ranches, estates, and vacation spots. Even when they or their children succumb to a dread disease like cancer, they do not link the tragedy to environmental factors, though scientists now believe that most cancers stem from human-made causes. They deny there is a larger problem because they themselves create that problem and owe much of their wealth to it. But how can they deny the threat of an ecological apocalypse brought on by ozone depletion, global warming, disappearing topsoil, and dying oceans? Do the dominant elites want to see life on Earth, including their own, destroyed? In the long run, they indeed will be victims of their own policies, along with everyone else. However, like us all, they live not in the long run, but in the here and the now. For the ruling interests, what is at stake is something of more immediate and greater concern than global ecology. It is the global capitalist accumulation. The fate of the biosphere is an abstraction compared to the fate of one's own investments. Furthermore, pollution pays, while ecology costs. Every dollar a company must spend on environmental protections is one less dollar in earnings. It is more profitable to treat the environment like a septic tank, pouring thousands of new harmful chemicals into the atmosphere each year, dumping raw industrial effluent into the rivers or bays, turning waterways into open sewers. The long-term benefit of preserving a river that runs alongside a community where the corporate polluters do not live anyway does not weigh as heavily as the immediate gain that comes from ecologically costly modes of production. Solar, wind, and tidal energy systems could help avert ecological disaster, but they would bring disaster to the rich oil cartels. 6 of the world's top 10 industrial corporations are involved primarily in the production of oil, gas, and motor vehicles. Fossil fuel pollution means billions in profits. Ecologically sustainable forms of production threaten those profits. Immense and imminent gain for oneself is far more compelling consideration than a diffuse loss shared by the general public. The cost of turning a forest into a wasteland weighs little against the profits that come from harvesting the timber. This conflict between immediate private gain on one hand and remote public benefit on the other operates even at the individual consumer level. Thus, it is in one's long-term interest not to operate a motor vehicle, which contributes more to environmental devastation than any other single consumer item. But we have an immediate need for transportation in order to get to work or do whatever else needs doing, so most of us have no choice except to own and use automobiles. The quote-unquote car culture demonstrates how the ecological crisis is not primarily an individual matter of man soiling his own nest. In most instances, the choice, quote-unquote, of using a car is no choice at all. Ecologically efficient and less costly solar electric car mass transportation has been deliberately destroyed since the 1930s in campaigns waged across the country by the automotive, oil, and tire industries. Corporations involved in transportation put, quote-unquote, America on wheels in order to maximize consumption costs for the public and profits for themselves, and to hell with the environment or anything else. The enormous interests of giant multinational corporations outweigh doomsayer predictions about an ecological crisis. Sober business heads refuse to get caught up in the quote-unquote hysteria about the environment, preferring to quietly augment their fortunes. Besides, there can always be found a few experts who will go against all the evidence and say that the jury is still out, that there is no conclusive proof to support the alarmists. Conclusive proof in this case would come only when we reach the point of no return. Ecology is profoundly subversive to capitalism. It needs planned, environmentally sustainable production rather than rapacious, unregulated kinds. It requires economical consumption rather than an artificially stimulated, overexpanding consumerism. It calls for natural, low-cost energy systems rather than profitable, high-cost polluting ones. Ecology's implications for capitalism are too horrendous for the capitalists to contemplate. Those in the higher circles, who once hired Blackshirts to destroy democracy out of fear that their class interests were threatened, have no trouble doing the same against eco-terrorists, quote-unquote, eco-terrorists. Those who have waged merciless war against the Reds have no trouble making war against the Greens. Those who have brought us poverty wages, exploitation, unemployment, homelessness, urban decay, and other oppressive economic conditions are not too troubled about bringing us ecological crisis. The plutocrats are more wedded to their wealth than to the earth upon which they live, more concerned with the fate of their fortunes than with the fate of the planet. The struggle over environmentalism is part of the class struggle itself, a fact that seems to have escaped many environmentalists. The impending eco-apocalypse is a class act. It has been created by and for the benefit of the few, at the expense of the many. The trouble is, this time the class act may well take us all down, once and forever. In the relationship between wealth and power, what is at stake is not only economic justice, but democracy itself and the survival of the biosphere. Unfortunately, the struggle for democracy and ecological sanity is not likely to be advanced by trendy, jargonized ABC theorists who treat class as an outmoded concept and who seem ready to consider anything but the realities of capitalist power. That's the boutique left, by the way. In this, they are little different from the dominant ideology they profess to oppose. They are the ones who need to get back on this planet. The only countervailing force that might eventually turn things in a better direction is an informed and mobilized citizenry. Let's reread that. The only countervailing force that might eventually turn things in a better direction is an informed and mobilized citizenry. Whatever their shortcomings, the people are our best hope. Indeed, we are they. Whether or not the ruling circles still wear black shirts, and whether or not their opponents are Reds, la lucha continua, the struggle continues, today, tomorrow, and through all history. Told you it was a good ending. So that's Blackshirts and Reds. I gave it 5 stars. It's wonderful. Highly recommend you read the whole book or at least listen to all of my episodes. We will start a new book next week. I'll have an episode out in the next couple of days giving you guys some options so we can take a vote on what you guys want me to read next. Keep fighting that good fight out there, guys. The struggle continues.